The rain that fell over Harlem on the night of June 10th, 1946, did not wash the streets clean. It only turned the city's sins into a slick, shimmering reflection of the neon lights dancing outside the 22 Club. Inside, the air was a thick tapestry of expensive cigar smoke, the scent of imported bourbon, and the rhythmic, soulful thrum of a saxophone that seemed to weep for everyone in the room. At a corner table, bathed in a shadow that seemed to belong to him personally, sat Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson. He didn't look like a man who commanded an empire of shadow. He looked like a professor of philosophy or a high-stakes diplomat, dressed in a charcoal gray wool suit that fit him with surgical precision. His hands, large and steady, were folded over a mahogany cane, and his eyes, dark, still, and impossibly deep, were fixed on a chessboard. He wasn't playing anyone. He was simply analyzing the geometry of a win that had happened 40 moves ago. The heavy oak doors of the club creaked open, admitting a gust of cold, wet air, and a man who looked like he had been hollowed out by grief. This was Elias Williams, a man who had spent 30 years breaking his back at the shipyards to give his daughter Ruby a life that didn't involve the grime of the tenements. Ruby was 18, a girl with a voice like a nightingale and a scholarship to Hunter College. She was the pride of 116th Street. Or she had been. Until 48 hours ago, when her body was found discarded like industrial waste in a vacant lot near the East River. The NYPD had spent exactly 20 minutes at the scene before filing a report that labeled her a prostitute involved in a dispute over services. To the precinct on 125th Street, she was just another statistic in a neighborhood they viewed as a colony. To Elias, she was the world. And since the law had chosen to spit on her memory, Elias had come to the only man whose law actually carried weight in the dark. Bumpy didn't look up when Elias approached. He didn't have to. He felt the shift in the room's temperature, the way his guards tensed and then relaxed when they recognized the desperation of a Harlem father. Elias fell to his knees, his voice a ragged whisper that barely cleared the sound of the jazz. He told Bumpy what the police wouldn't hear, that Ruby had been seen being forced into a black Cadillac with 5 men, men who spoke with the accents of downtown, men who thought Harlem was their playground and its women were their toys. Bumpy remained motionless for a long minute, his gaze never leaving the chessboard. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he moved a white knight to a position of absolute dominance. He looked up, and for the first time, Elias saw the cold, calculating stillness that made the 5 families of New York hesitate before crossing 110th Street. Bumpy didn't offer a handkerchief or a prayer. He offered something much rarer in 1946 for a black man in America. He offered the truth. He told Elias that the police weren't looking for the killers because the killers were protected by the very badges they wore. He told him that in Harlem, justice didn't speak English. It spoke the language of consequences. By 2 a.m., the word had gone out through the invisible arteries of the neighborhood. The chimnung, the shoe shiners on the corners, the waitresses at the Lenox Lounge, the numbers runners, and the elevator operators became the eyes and ears of a king. Bumpy sat in the back of his own Cadillac, gliding through the rain-slicked streets like a ghost. He wasn't just looking for 5 men. He was looking for a breach in the walls of his kingdom. He knew exactly who had been moving into East Harlem lately, pushing their luck and their appetites into his territory. It was the Genovese foot soldiers, young, arrogant men who thought their skin color gave them a pass to do as they pleased in the dark town. They were wrong. The meeting took place at 4 a.m. in a neutral warehouse on the edge of the Harlem River. On one side stood the representatives of the Italian mafia, led by a mid-level captain named Rico, who wore his arrogance like a cheap cologne. On the other side stood Bumpy, alone, leaning against his cane as if he were waiting for a bus. The contrast was cinematic. The Italians were twitchy, hands near their holsters, eyes darting. Bumpy was a statue carved from midnight. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even use profanity. He spoke with the eloquent, rhythmic cadence of a man who had read every book in the prison library twice. He told Rico that 5 of his animals had stained the streets of Harlem with the blood of an innocent girl. He didn't ask for an apology. He didn't ask for money. He gave an ultimatum that sent a chill through the damp air of the warehouse. He told them they had 72 hours. If those 5 men were not delivered to him, or if they were not removed from the face of the earth by their own kin, Harlem would become a graveyard for every Italian business, every delivery truck, and every soldier who dared to step north of the border. "I am not a man of war," Bumpy said, his voice as smooth as silk and as sharp as a razor. "But I am the architect of this neighborhood, and if you force me to pull the foundation, the whole of New York will feel the collapse." The first 24 hours were defined by a terrifying silence. The city held its breath. The NYPD, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, increased patrols, but they were blind. They walked the streets while the real power was moving beneath them. Bumpy's network was surgical. He didn't need to kick down doors. He simply waited for the information to flow to him. By the second day, the pressure began to cook the East Side. The Mafia realized that Bumpy wasn't bluffing. They saw his men, silent, disciplined, and utterly loyal, standing on the corners of every block where Italian interest lay. They realized that Bumpy wasn't just a gangster. He was a Hitrong Hong Ching Tuk, an unofficial mayor who could shut down the economy of a borough with a single phone call. The Italians valued profit above all else, and Bumpy had made the cost of protecting 5 rapists and murderers far too high. On the second night, the negotiation moved from threats to the negotiation of blood. Bumpy met with the higher-ups in a dimly lit back room of a funeral parlor, a choice of venue that was not accidental. There, the Boja Kwa Harlem played his masterstroke. He showed them the police reports, the ones that labeled Ruby Williams a prostitute. He told them that this was an insult not just to the girl, but to the order of the streets. He reminded them that they all lived by a code and that animals who killed for sport without permission were a liability to everyone's business. He offered them a way out. Give him the locations, and he would handle the cleanup so the Mafia wouldn't have to admit they had lost control of their own men. It was a deal wrapped in the logic of a statesman. The final 24 hours were the hour of the execution. There were no grand shootouts, no cinematic explosions. That wasn't Bumpy's style. He was a daikisu, a grand master who preferred the quiet click of a checkmate. One by one, the 5 men were found. They weren't found by the police. They were found by the silence of the Harlem night. They were taken from their hideouts, their social clubs, and their beds. They were brought to the very lot where they had discarded Ruby Williams. Bumpy was there, standing under a black umbrella, watching the rain wash away the dirt. He didn't look at them with hatred. He looked at them with the clinical detachment of a judge delivering a final verdict. He told them that in his Harlem, no one was Vaudin. No one was anonymous. He told them that Ruby Williams was his daughter, his sister, and his neighbor, and that because they had failed to recognize her humanity, they had forfeited their own. When the sun rose on the third day, the 72 hours were up. The 5 men had vanished as if they had never existed. There were no bodies for the police to find, no evidence to tie back to the 22 Club. There was only the sudden, jarring realization by the NYPD that the case they had closed so carelessly had been solved by a power far greater than their own. The justice that the law had refused to provide had been delivered in the dark, whispered in the language of the streets. The story of the 72 hours didn't end with a death. It ended with a celebration of life. 3 days after the ultimatum, Harlem witnessed the most magnificent funeral in its history. Bumpy Johnson personally paid for a white carriage pulled by 4 white horses to carry Ruby Williams to her final resting place. He didn't hide in the shadows that day. He walked behind the carriage, his head held high, his charcoal suit pressed, his mahogany cane clicking rhythmically on the pavement. Thousands of people lined the streets of 7th Avenue. They didn't see a gangster. They saw a Vi Vua Kong Vung Mien. They saw a man who had stood where the law had retreated, a man who had used the fear of his name to protect the honor of a girl the world had tried to forget. As the casket was lowered, Bumpy placed a single white rose on the lid. He leaned in and whispered something that only the wind heard, but everyone understood the sentiment. In this kingdom, you are never alone. This is the legend of Bumpy Johnson, a man who lived in the gray space between a saint and a sinner, a strategist who understood that power is not measured by how many people you kill, but by how many people you protect. He was the Boza, the Titrom, and the Chienlukja, who proved that when the system fails the people will create their own king. Today the 22 Club is gone, and the neon lights have faded. But if you walk the streets of Harlem at midnight when the rain starts to fall, you can still hear the phantom click of a mahogany cane and the echo of a justice that doesn't need a courtroom to be absolute. Does this legend of the 72-hour hunt change how you see the balance between power and morality in the streets of old New York? Would you like me to explore another moment of iconicity where Bumpy used his intellect to outmaneuver the authorities during the height of the 1960s?